Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Thrive55 Plus podcast, where we give practical inspiration so you get healthier. Your host, Cheryl Jones, will help you uncover more of who you already are and explore what you need to heal and flourish one moment at a time. Cheryl is an author, wellness leader, and health coach voted one of the most powerful women in the mindfulness movement by Mindful Magazine. There is no AI-generated content in this podcast. This has been created by subject matter expert Cheryl Jones.
Welcome to the Thrive55 Plus show. I'm your host, Cheryl Jones, and in this episode, we're going to explore how to cultivate spirituality and energize your spirit with Dr. Brandon Nappi. I met Dr. Nappi 20 years ago when he founded Copper Beach Institute, where I was honored to have led numerous programs and retreats. Brandon, I loved seeing where your journey has brought you. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. It's such a blessing to be here. I'm so thankful. It feels like a homecoming, actually, and I'm catching up with an old friend. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you again. I feel like this topic is perhaps more relevant than ever before. At least it feels that way in my own heart when I think of everything that so many of us have gone through during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and now in a nation that feels like we're perhaps more divided than ever. I just felt called to invite us to have this conversation to really explore, what spirituality is and how we can dial that up to promote healing and wholeness for both individuals and in our society. So I just want to start with, from your perspective, Brandon, what is spirituality?
It's this beautiful word that we throw around a lot, isn't it? The word spirituality comes through the Latin spiritus and translates an earlier Greek word, pneuma. Both of those words in Latin and Greek just mean breath. So, there is something very elemental about spirituality. It's the beliefs and practices that orient us to life itself. So just like our breath keeps our physical body alive, our spirituality are those beliefs and practices, those ways of gathering with other humans that orient us to life itself. And I always like to say in my teaching, this is profoundly simple. Everything that exists is connected to everything else that exists. And so any sort of spiritual practice really is just about cultivating this sense of connection. And when I teach, I'm talking about connection with ourselves. So asking sort of the deep question around who am I? What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be me fully alive? There's this ancient saying that the glory of God is the human being fully alive. And so that's really all spirituality is. It's anything that supports fullness of life. So the question, what does it mean to be me and how can I more deeply connect with myself is usually the starting point. How can I connect more deeply with the people around me or those other humans and creatures that I share the planet with? And then ultimately, how do I connect more deeply to my source? So connection with self, others, and source really become sort of the three ways that we investigate and bring curiosity to this big, big question of spirituality. And it all comes from this one word, breath. And, you can survive, I don't know how long you can survive, many, many days without food, fewer days without water, but you can only survive a few moments without breath. And I like to think that, there's an analogy here too with spirituality that to really survive and thrive in the long term as human beings, we need to have a sense of spirituality. We need to have a sense of connection to ourselves, others, and to our source.
It's so beautiful and powerful, and I love the way you articulate it and make it a little more accessible, because sometimes I think that word it can bring up a lot of different thoughts and feelings for people. And sometimes we think things are just so mysterious that they aren't accessible. And I know we've had a lot of conversations about mindfulness in the past and being present in the moment and the breath. And so the beautiful, powerful breath that helps us to anchor to the present moment. And I love what you said about the aliveness, that spirituality is that which gives us this sense of aliveness. And so that's really powerful. It's interesting, like I've heard a lot of people say, and it seems to be a very common phrase, that somebody may say that they are spiritual but not religious. And that seems to be kind of like a phrase that people also throw around. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, what does that mean to be spiritual but not religious?
Yeah, in my own life and my own professional work, I've had the absolute delight of working with people who identify in almost every conceivable way when it comes to religion and spirituality. I've worked with devoutly religious folks quite closely, people for whom the official, traditional, organized structures were their home and were a place where they could cultivate, deep self-awareness, deep relationships with others, deep connections to God and to the planet. And this was a place where their thriving was really, really cultivated from every imaginable religious tradition. I've met those people, I've walked with them, I've learned with them, from them, and that's a really, really beautiful path. It's one, obviously, that's been passed along for millennia. From the earliest days, human beings have been religious. And by religious, we just simply mean they've been part of a formal community that has its own sort of sensibility, teachings, rules, norms. Of course, in recent decades, there has been the emergence of spirituality that once only existed in religious communities, now that exists outside of religious communities. And I've met, countless beautiful, radiant souls who are trying to cultivate a sense of spirituality, this connection with self, other, and source outside traditional paths. I've also met folks who sort of live in between those spaces, right? They may not attend regular church services, temple services. They might not go to a mosque, but they really feel inspired by a specific lineage or a specific religious tradition. Look, there's, Thomas Merton, one of my dear mentors. I never had the chance to meet him, but sort of mentor through the ages, through his writing, wonderful Catholic Benedictine monk. He used to say that either everything is sacred or nothing is sacred. So each of these paths is an authentic path to the divine. God is, I believe, everywhere. The truth and wisdom is waiting in every corner of reality to be discovered. So each approach has its own gifts and has its own shadow side. In my practice of Zen has always taught me that, there's light and shadow in everything, and light and shadow in all of us, and light and shadow in every approach that we take to the sacred. There's light and shadow in the spiritual but not religious approach. There's light and shadow to the religious approach. And by the way, I've worked also with a lot of atheists who are seeking meaning and purpose, and they may not even use the word spiritual, but they're asking many of the same questions about what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to thrive? What does it mean to find well-being? What does it mean to feel a sense of connection and common purpose with other people? And how do we care for this very vulnerable and tender world that we live in? And so, if you are a human being with a beating heart, then I have great passion to walk with you and learn from you about these sort of big questions about what is ultimate.
I love the fresh language that you're bringing to this, because it does feel like there's a little bit of either orness, as people are trying to find their way with cultivating their own understanding of spirituality, their spiritual wellness, and how they express that. I know for myself, I grew up Catholic, and that provided for me a very beautiful, powerful foundation. and connection to the divine within myself and to something bigger than me that did help me to feel grounded to explore other things, other religions, other spiritual practices, and where I find God. I agree. I find God everywhere, and especially in nature. I feel like I'm a transcendentalist, Thoreau, Emerson gal at heart. So I love the opportunity that what you're sharing and the broadness of what you're sharing to, again, make this opportunity to develop ourselves this way a little more accessible to people. And so, kind of along those lines, how do we cultivate spirituality?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are as many ways to cultivate spirituality as there are humans. And so that's the good news, right? There's so many paths. I think the good news is also, there have been historically some really wise guides that have laid out some tested, wise paths for us to follow. I mean, you mentioned nature. In the medieval Christian mind, nature was often considered a book of scripture, right? It was a place of sacred revelation. And one of my dear patron saints, Francis of Assisi, one of the most popular, beloved saints in history, was celebrated precisely because he recognized, though he's not the first to do so, the way in which nature itself is revelatory. So, for folks who are just beginning on the path, you can never go wrong with immersing yourself in the natural world. And, it's not like you need, 1,000 acres of woods. Take 10 minutes with a tree, with a plant, with your pet, with the sunrise, stargaze, right? So, I mean, the pathway to the sacred is everywhere. The gate of heaven is everywhere. So, spirituality, in some ways, is about developing the eyes to see that there are limitless paths everywhere. So nature is a really, really good place to start. Seeking out a guide is also a really wonderful place to start. And I mean, you could do this in a number of ways. You can find various teachers who've written books, right? So many wonderful spiritual teachers out there. You can work one-on-one with a teacher. Sometimes that's called spiritual direction, spiritual companionship, just sitting with another human who may be a few steps ahead of you on the journey, and exploring these questions of belief and faith and what is sacred, and gosh, how can I cultivate deeper and deeper awareness? There's also, for those who are really adventurous, one of the most beautiful things to do is just go visit a monastery. Any monastery nearly will be a place of deep quiet, of deep beauty, of a community where people are living very intentionally and making very, sometimes radical, sometimes countercultural, really generous life decisions in order to seek God. You can go to sacred texts, and each religion has its own, series of sacred texts. Those are beautiful places to start. Spiritual practices, centering prayer, meditation, vipassana practice, loving kindness practice. So, we're not just transformed by ideas. And this is sort of like the Western bias, right? Like if I just go sort of like cram as many like really cool spiritual ideas in my head, then I'll suddenly be healed or transformed, right? Like one of the great beliefs in my own Christian tradition is that on the one hand, the human heart is very open to healing. But on the other side of things, the human heart is very slow to heal, right? And so you don't just think your way to healing. We need practices to find healing. So, I often think one of the things that we can do on the spiritual path is to go back to our root tradition, even if it's the one we may have left intentionally, the one that we might find, ourselves disagreeing with. Maybe even it's a path that we had some trauma in. This was always the suggestion of the Dalai Lama. Start where you started and do a little bit more learning there, because you may actually find that there is some deep wisdom there, and there's some other folks there that actually are working to heal the very thing that was problematic about the tradition that you started with, right? So, I mean, just a few ideas, but gosh, it's as simple as watching a sunrise, too, right?
Being present, right? I think that you're outlining some beautiful, simple, powerful ways to help us to reconnect with ourselves and our values and our spirits. And I think about how my practices have changed throughout the years, and I've done, as you're suggesting, gone back to my Catholic roots, and that has helped me to expand out and understand the connection between the seven sacraments, to the seven branches and the tree of life, to the seven chakras. Like, there's so much interrelatedness between all of these different spiritual practices. And I feel like I've always believed there is one river that flows beneath all of these spiritual practices. So you're right. It doesn't really matter which one we pick. Just, pick something and open our hearts to grow. I think a lot too about a higher power, and that can mean a lot of different things to different people. Just curious about your perspective on, regardless of what our spiritual beliefs are, how can we connect with a power that's greater than ourselves, especially these days when there's so much isolation and disconnection? That's exactly what we want. We want to feel like we belong to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger than us. So, what are your thoughts on how we can connect with that higher power?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, let me say a couple of things first. I mean, what I love about the work that I've been able to do as, for example, a spiritual director, right? Just someone who works one-on-one with someone in their spiritual life, is that, no matter where they're coming from, no matter how they name their higher power, we can always talk about what it is that animates their life, whether it be a transcendent God, whether it be a sense of energy that pervades the universe, or even for some of my atheist friends, whether it be some ultimate values like compassion, or loving kindness that that animate life. We can always talk about higher power, even though for individuals that might shift. For me as a Christian, the way I like to think about what is ultimate, our source, in the Christian world, we use a very specific word for this, and we talk about this word in a specific way, and that is that we believe what's most ultimate is just love. Right? So what we're really talking about when we're talking about God is we're talking about love. We're talking about this. Now we start to use words, and we get into dangerous territory because we actually don't know what we're talking about, right? But I'll give it a shot anyway. It's never stopped me before. We're talking about this matrix of connection, this infinite matrix of connection that holds everything together. One of the sort of early parents of Christian theology is Saint Augustine, and many folks, even in secular contexts, in college or something, will read Saint Augustine. It's often considered like the earliest sort of pioneer into human psychology. And Augustine will simply describe the Trinity as the lover, the beloved, and the love that they share between them. In the Christian tradition, it's really just our rather clumsy, though I hope beautiful, way of talking about the infinite interconnectedness of everything. And of course, Buddhism has been also saying this for many years. And, our beloved teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away a couple of years ago, a Vietnamese a Buddhist monk, made this sort of interconnection, what he called interbeing, really the center of his teaching. So this higher power is something we can't lose. You can't be severed from. It is the very ground of your being. In fact, the Muslim poet Kabir, called God the breath within the breath. And so if you're breathing, you are connected to your source. There's nowhere you could go without being empowered, loved, connected, and nourished by this source. And you mentioned before, Cheryl, presence, and of course we met through our love of mindfulness practice, and that's why I love mindfulness practice, is because this practice of being present, right, which is all that mindfulness is, capacity to be present in the moment, it prepares us to do, I mean, any spiritual practice, right? Any spiritual practice, any human practice, actually, whether we be riding a bike, driving a car, making dinner, or I don't know, sharing a kiss with a beloved, like it all requires being present. And as humans, we are happier, we're better, we're more compassionate, we're more loving when we can be right here in the present moment. And so I sort of see mindfulness practice, or this practice of presence, as like the universal key that unlocks every door. So no matter what spiritual path you're going down, you're a devout Jew, a devout Muslim, you're an atheist, mindfulness practice transcends any ideology because it's so foundational for us as human beings. And so much of my work over the past years has been teaching this very simple practice of presence because it unlocks every door I think that we as humans want to enter.
I so appreciate that, Brandon, and you know my love of mindfulness, and it's really that for me. What's helped me crack the code helps me continue to evolve and to find places for healing and growth. And it's just so energizing being able to connect with you today and really, help people to hopefully open their hearts a little bit more and to live more intentionally and to heal and flourish and thrive forward. That's what we're here for. I would love to hear just a little bit about where your energy is these days and how people can get in contact with you.
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Well, folks can always find me, at my work at Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. So you can just, Google me and Google Yale, and I'll pop up. So I guess I would answer that question around my energy sort of at the macro level and at the micro level. So at the macro level, I'm helping leaders to be of service in the world in sustainable, compassionate, and just ways. So our vision is that we are training leaders to create thriving communities of belonging where we gather with the sacred at the center, and then radiate love and compassion out into the world. And it's hard to do that today as a leader, to lead communities of love and compassion and justice. It's exhausting. You named it. There's so much isolation, so much fragmentation, so much overwhelm. And so it's just such a joy for me to design leadership programs to help leaders lead in a way that's maybe not only sustainable, like it doesn't give them just enough energy to keep going, but to lead and to serve in such a way that's actually regenerative, that actually generates extra energy than I actually expended in leading. That's the kind of magic that we are thinking about, praying about, meditating on every day. It's hard to lead, but for folks who have a heart and a mind and a passion to lead, we want them to come on down to Yale Divinity School and learn with us, because the world needs so much healing and so much compassionate leadership right now. So that's sort of the big picture. At the micro level, what keeps me buoyed and energetic and passionate is the microscopic things, watching my garden grow. So I'm a gardener. It's springtime at the moment here, so watching crocuses and daffodils and tulips already start to show signs of life here, and early March is so exciting. I started knitting in the last year. There's something about this subtle combination in knitting of stillness, right? So I'm seated, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not moving, but there is this subtle movement of hands, right? And so it feels like a monastic contemplative practice to me. So I'm still a baby knitter, but loving, loving, loving knitting. And of course, playing guitar is always where a lot of my energy is. So I feel like I always need a project at the macro level, but I absolutely need like a micro project. And when I'm not doing those things, I'm playing volleyball. I was a volleyball coach back in the old days. So thank you. My life is really full, and so many things I'm grateful for.
Oh, I'm just lit up like a Christmas tree listening to where your journey has brought you, and just so grateful for this time together and this reconnection. And again, really hoping that it inspires our listeners here to explore and perhaps find some new pathways to healing and a greater sense of wholeness and abundant love. So again, thank you so much, Brandon. And in closing, I also want to thank my listeners. If you have a comment or a question about today's episode, just write to me at Cheryl@thrivingwithcheryljones.com. I hope you'll join me next time when we'll explore how to navigate difficult conversations with a little more grace and ease. Thanks very much for listening. Be well and thrive on.
Thank you for tuning in to the Thrive 55 Plus podcast. Contact Cheryl with a burning question, access free mindfulness meditation resources, and schedule a free consultation to explore how you can achieve your goals and aspirations through personalized coaching sessions with Cheryl. Just visit her website, thrivingwithcheryljones.com. Subscribe to or follow the Thrive 55 Plus podcast. Leave a review or share it with a friend. Until next time, be well and thrive on.